Hi everybody, this is Agnes from Sediment, and today let's talk about 5 horrifying things wine snobs do. I would want to say that I am guilt-free, but I guess we all have been there. At some point, we may have felt superior to others and maybe started acting a bit arrogant, pretentious, or assuming. Showing off, correcting, or teaching others without being asked. We all are human after all, and it is not the mistakes we make in our life that define us, but how we deal with them and work through them. Unfortunately to some, but hopefully amusingly to us, there are still people who continue down the path of a wine snob. So let's talk about 5 most horrifying, deadly sins of a wine snob behavior that must stop now. Yeah! It was you? This one is probably most fun because someone who is dropping names is not fooling anyone. In the eyes of a professional, they oftentimes look quite silly, especially if the name dropping is not backed up by coherent knowledge. Now, the most common way to name drop is by mentioning famous brands like Cristal, Dom Perignon, Chateau Petrus, or Sassicaia. For example, ordering one of the cheapest wines at the restaurant, tasting it, and then saying that it is not as good as the Chateau Margaux you had 2 days ago or you have at home. It sounds silly. A true wine professional would not feel the need to clarify that, and bragging about what you have at home sounds like something I might have done when I was 6. And trust me, I definitely embellished stories about the things that I had at home back then. But then there are truly ridiculous name droppings. For example, I once had a client who insisted that he wants to have Chateau. Chateau is good. Or another who specifically asked for Metodo wine, not Méthode Champenoise or bottle fermented sparkling wine, just Metodo. That's when you know you are exiting the snob zone and entering the fool's territory. Now, there's nothing wrong with not knowing, forgetting, or mixing up something you have learned at tastings or masterclasses. I have been there myself. But it is all about how we act towards others. So, stay sexy and humble. Drink, 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 wine, wine, wine. Drink, 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 wine, wine, wine. I have utmost respect for people with deep knowledge and understanding of wine. I have often noticed that those who truly understand a specific field tend not to assume that everyone else shares the same knowledge. Therefore, they use simpler language or more approachable ways to discuss and explain things. However, the moment someone starts using advanced terminology to describe simple concepts, I see it as a way to alienate people or make wine seem more complex, difficult, and definitely more snobbish than it actually is, or really should be. It is not normal to walk into a wine shop and ask at which Brix level were these grapes harvested, or which Chardonnay clones were used to make this wine. When you ask questions like that, it is more about creating an image of yourself and not because you truly care about those Chardonnay clones. And I would be willing to bet on Champagne Salon 2008 Magnum bottle that if the salesperson would answer that it is clone Gin Gin or D263, it would not make much sense to anyone. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a geeky conversation with my fellow colleagues and study partners, and I also enjoy discussing more specific topics with people who are generally interested in wine. However, I want people to feel as comfortable as possible when enjoying and learning about wine. Announcing out loud at a wine tasting that this wine has had way too much batonnage can sound a bit snobbish. Beyond using terminology that not everyone might understand, this behavior also implies that the wine is not at the expected quality level, even though others might have liked it. this one in itself is not a bad thing to do. I am not a French or German speaker, so whenever I travel, I try to listen as carefully as possible and sometimes silently repeat the words to myself. When brave enough, I will ask for advice how to pronounce certain words like vineyard names, techniques, or even brand names. As wine professionals, we want to express ourselves correctly. That said, I know I will have an accent when speaking English, let alone when trying to pronounce names in French or Spanish, as they are not my native languages. Some words are easier, some are more difficult, but there's a special place in hell for people who want to make you feel bad for mispronouncing names. I once had a colleague at a restaurant, nasty fella. A couple ordered a wine and shyly asked, "May we have Chianti Classico?" He loudly corrected them, "We don't have Chianti. Maybe you meant Chianti Classico?" Now, I hope these guests had a good sense of humor and plenty of self-esteem to laugh it off. But let's be honest, if that was their first date, the sommelier just belittled the man in front of his date, probably making him regret ordering the wine in the first place. It's an impolite, snobbish way to behave. It is completely fine and normal that certain wine styles are not to your liking. I wear a lot of green and gray, but I would never argue that bright red is an inferior color. It is the same with wine. I might not prefer a certain style or even grape variety, but I would never assume that what I drink is better, nor would I make fun of or judge others for their choices. Actually, this kind of behavior is more common amongst wine waiters and sommeliers, as I have heard frequently them belittling others for their choices. No, I would not drink New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc or Prosecco. Instead, I would choose Puy Fumé and Champagne. And I will be honest with you, Prosecco is not my go-to choice for sparkling wine, but recently I was served one at the restaurant opening party and it stopped me. It was so good that I went and took a picture of that bottle. It had everything you want in a Prosecco: lively, refreshing, and bright white fruit driven that lingers on the palate long enough and invites you for another sip. And seriously, who in their right mind would sneer on New Zealand wines? I would even argue that New Zealand produces on average highest quality wines. I mean, their entry-level wines already start at really high standard, and when you get to the good stuff, epic. So for those of you who believe that only France or even just only Bordeaux or Burgundy can make great wines and the rest of the wines are for the lesser palates, you could not be more wrong. I love a Burgundy myself, but in no way does Burgundy have monopoly over great wine. And by the way, Pinot Noir is not the only grape variety that makes epic red wines. So dear wine snob, I just called to say you're missing out a lot, and if that doesn't bother you, at least don't pressure others to miss out as well. Ice in wine? Seriously? Now, this is something that bothers me, sometimes to a point where I can no longer laugh about it. It makes me sad, and at times it even frustrates me. This kind of behavior can manifest in many ways really, but most common is probably dissing wine because it is expensive. I have seen it a lot in the comments section here on my YouTube channel, and I have witnessed it far too often at professional wine tastings and judging competitions. Declaring that wine is overrated or downright bad only because it has high price point is just tasteless. Do I think that Champagne Salon is really expensive? Yes, absolutely, definitely out of my price range. Do I also think that Champagne Salon is amazing wine and I would like to drink it more often? 100%. In judging competitions, this is even worse. A simple YouTube comment might not have much impact, but when a judge penalizes and scores down wine only because it is expensive, it really bothers me. We don't know the whole backstory when we are tasting in blind. It could be a family-owned winery working small plots, investing in expensive equipment, paying crazy high taxes, and yet we say, meh, it is too expensive to be that good. Another direction this behavior might take is more complex. Some people will diss every wine made from international grape varieties, praising only native grapes. Others criticize wine that has even a hint of sugar in it. Yes, I'm looking at you who only drink Zero Brut Nature champagnes and bone-dry Rieslings. You shout so loud that some winemakers are actually changing their styles and not for the better. And of course, there are those who diss any wine that is not natural or has some SO2 added. I think without deeper knowledge and understanding, it is easy to assume that $500 wine is not worth it or that wine should only be made in one way. But once we take the time to learn both sides of the story, we can make a more educated decision. And all of a sudden, things don't seem so black and white anymore. So there you have it, scary, horrifying, wine snobbish behaviors that would make even Jason Voorhees run in terror. Let me know in the comments below what snobbish behavior you have encountered or maybe have found yourself guilty of. Wine world is filled with a lot of written and unwritten rules, so make sure to watch next video about which rules even most dedicated wine professionals break.